spectacular explosions in Moscow, ships hit daily in the Sea of Azov, a fuel crisis in Russia. All this while the Russian armed forces are suffering such heavy losses that recruitment can no longer keep up. And even though the city of Kostiantynivka is under heavy pressure, Ukrainian soldiers are advancing on several sections of the front. So the obvious question arises, is Ukraine currently winning the war? That's what we want to answer here in this video. Save the most with my code at Holy. With its duration of over 4 years, the war in Ukraine has long since become a war of attrition. To win it, individual battles are not decisive, but rather the ability to hold out longer than the enemy. That means the ability to finance the war, the ability to recruit soldiers, and the ability to equip and supply them. Directly related to this, of course, is also the ability of the warring parties to keep their own country motivated and to convince the population to support the ongoing war. While Ukraine has repeatedly achieved tactical successes, such as capturing positions or towns, it has not won any operations, meaning no campaigns, since the fall of 2022. During that time, Russia captured towns like Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Toretsk, Pokrovsk, Vuhledar, and others, and also recaptured Sucha in Kursk, which had previously been taken by the Ukrainians. Ukraine was repeatedly able to push the Russians back locally, whether in Kupiansk or recently in the Pokrovska and Stepnohirska regions. But comparable successes, like the Kharkiv offensive or the liberation of Kherson, have not happened, while Russia is currently on the verge of capturing Kostiantynivka. Despite Russia's successes on the ground, the question is still valid whether Ukraine is actually winning the war, because it is becoming increasingly successful on the strategic level. As the US demonstrated this year with regard to Iran, a country can win every battle and still lose the war. And that is exactly what the Kremlin is facing right now. During Joe Biden's term, Ukraine carried out its first attacks on the Russian oil industry. This was to the displeasure of the American president at the time, who wanted to keep gas prices low for his re-election. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has now completely lifted the restrictions on such attacks, while US intelligence agencies are even helping the Ukrainians carry out these attacks. This year alone, about 24 refineries have been attacked, in addition to numerous gas processing plants, pumping stations, tank farms, export terminals, and offshore platforms. Attacks are now taking place in Moscow and St. Petersburg, despite the massive concentration of air defenses that the Russians have deployed there. This has now led to a fuel crisis throughout Russia. The country that John McCain once called a gas station with nuclear weapons is no longer able to provide gasoline to its population. The resulting inflation has now led to local prices close to €5 per liter. But it's not just the civilian population that is suffering from shortages. There are now reports that, locally, even the military no longer has enough fuel available. This situation gets even worse near the front lines. There, the Ukrainian air campaign in the rear and deep rear areas has made it increasingly difficult not only to supply the front itself. In fact, the entire land bridge connecting to Crimea is now within range of the available strike assets, especially the affordable Hornet drones. These are now hunting down, on a large scale, anything that supplies Crimea and Russian troops on the southern part of the front. However, as a peninsula, Crimea is accessible from the sea, and the south of Ukraine has several large ports that allow Russia to bring in supplies. While Ukrainian sea drones have long made supplies across the Black Sea extremely dangerous, the Sea of Azov was safe from Ukrainian sea drones due to the barriers in the Kerch Strait, and this gave Russia the potential to continue supplying its troops in Crimea, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. It did, because now that is also coming to an end. Since early July, Ukrainians have launched large-scale drone campaigns, now targeting Russian merchant ships in the Sea of Azov. By mid-July, more than 100 ships had already been hit, and traffic through the Sea of Azov had practically come to a halt. As a result, Russia has not only lost the ability to supply Crimea and the southern front by sea, but trade in Russian goods via the Volga-Don Canal system has also come to a standstill, putting further strain on the economy. The supplies coming by road over the land bridge are constantly under attack. Nothing is coming by ship anymore, and air transport can't even begin to carry the volumes necessary to maintain combat effectiveness. That leaves only the Kerch Bridge, over which no fuel has been allowed to be transported since the Ukrainian attacks. Maybe this is the reason why Ukraine has so far refrained from attacks, because they are waiting for the Russians to resume fuel transports over the bridge out of sheer necessity. If this happens, a single drone hitting a train with tank cars or a tanker truck could, due to the intense heat from burning diesel and gasoline, disable the bridge for a long time, or even cause parts of it to collapse, which would be much harder to achieve with the available means without the Russians kindly providing accelerants. If the bridge were also to fail, the fate of the Russian presence throughout the south of Ukraine, up to the Donetsk-Mariupol line, would be in question, which would present the prospect of a strategic victory for Ukraine. Russia is facing increasing personnel issues, as discussed earlier. Recruitment is grinding to a halt because Russians now know what awaits them at the front. Igor Girkin, for example, recently wrote about the prison where he is being held. In the colony, there are quite a few convicted deserters who have mutilated hands and stiff knees after severe injuries. Any halfway objective military medical commission would declare these cripples unfit with 100% certainty, even for non-active service, but they are still convicted as deserters. And after all that, they hope to lure someone into the army. With such a piggish, negligent attitude toward their own wounded soldiers, with their conviction, the disabled likely lost both their disability pension and pay for their time in service. Fortunately, they themselves are probably not facing a conviction as deserters. At least I hope so. And therefore, their pension should not be affected in this regard. For many of them, however, the pension entitlements would not be sufficient, at least to meet their own standards and wishes. And then there's no way around saving privately through investments. And today's partner can help with that. I often discuss how political and economic events are linked, and this includes financial markets as well. That's exactly why the topic of retirement planning has been on my mind for years. I don't believe that I can consistently assess the market better than everyone else, but I do believe that time and discipline make an enormous difference in the long run. That's why I'm a big fan of savings plans. You invest regularly, take advantage of dollar cost averaging, and largely remove your own emotions from the equation. That's exactly why I find the innovation at my partner XTB exciting. In addition to ETF savings plans, you can now also invest in individual stocks automatically. One example right now is the Mercedes-Benz stock. Instead of just buying it once, I can now easily add it to my savings plan, together with ETFs or other stocks. Thanks to fractional shares, this is even possible with smaller amounts. If you don't want to put together a portfolio yourself, you can also use ready-made savings plans. And if you know exactly what you want, you can build your own strategy. On top of that, there are the terms I've appreciated for a long time. You can invest up to 100,000 euros in stocks and ETFs commission-free every month. XTB is also supervised by BaFin and offers a customer service that has won multiple awards. And right now, there's also a limited time promotion. If you open a free account with XTB using my link by the end of July and enter my code Heinrich, you'll receive a Mercedes-Benz share for free. If you want to check it out, you'll find all the details in terms of participation, as always in the link below in the video description or via the QR code. It's understandable that all these things don't exactly help to find voluntary recruits. All in all, things look very bad for Russia, and it's going to get even worse. Russia has massively strengthened Moscow's air defense in recent months. The systems used in this process most likely exceed the rate of new production, while Ukraine continues to destroy more than one system per day on average. The decreasing number of air defense systems is therefore being concentrated in prestigious locations, where they are still unable to fully repel Ukrainian attacks, as Moscow has recently shown. At the same time, this reduces the number of systems available in other locations. All of this is happening while the Ukrainians are improving their drones and are able to deploy them deeper and deeper into Russia. And Russian mill bloggers like Reba are now expressing concerns that the Ukrainian FP-5 Flamingo cruise missiles could soon have a range of 4,500 kilometers, and that Ukraine has already stockpiled them. In the near future, we can probably expect even more spectacular attacks, including against the critical Russian armaments industry. While the fall of Kostiantynivka should only be a matter of time, a victory there won't help the Russians. If the economy at home is heading toward collapse, Ukrainian attacks are knocking out oil refineries and factories, and the soldiers on the southern front have less and less equipment and ammunition. Russian mill bloggers recognize the seriousness of the situation. The situation at the front remains critical. We are making only minimal progress. The enemy is putting pressure on us with counterattacks and attacking our logistics. Every advance comes with losses. Our trucks can't get closer than 50 kilometers to the front line. Up to 20 kilometers from the front line, supplies are delivered by cars and motorcycles. To the front line itself, supplies are delivered on foot with drones and ground drones. You can't get any further than that. The personnel crisis is getting worse. The plan to recruit contract soldiers for the year 2026 has fallen short by 15 to 20%. There is a constant shortage of personnel. The army is bursting at the seams. The crisis is systemic and affects all levels. It gets worse every day. The risk of demoralization and a decline in combat effectiveness is growing. The Russian veteran Yevgeny Golman paints a bleak picture for Russia. He is already openly speaking of a military and domestic political catastrophe that Russia is being drawn into. According to him, the country is still being calmed with television chatter about controlling the situation, while in reality, drones and missiles are penetrating ever deeper without hindrance. The economy is collapsing, and people are being made to suffer who have to silently endure all of this. He places his main emphasis on the fact that modern warfare has ultimately exposed the weakness of the system. Tank armadas and millions of front lines are no longer needed. A country can be destroyed with drones, attacks on infrastructure, and slow economic suffocation. And while fairy tales of greatness are being told at the top, Russia is losing its industry, laying off masses of people, and its own resources and markets are increasingly coming under Chinese influence. His harshest conclusion is that the system no longer has the situation under control, but is merely living out its last days and dragging the country into a prolonged collapse both at the front and on the home front. A few weeks ago, the Russian daily newspaper Moskovsky Komsomolets published an article titled "Astonishing Defeats: When Geopolitical Failures Can Be More Useful Than Glorious Victories." The mechanism of Russian history has always turned defeats into victories. Even though the article was deleted after 2 days, I was able to make a backup copy, which vividly shows us the mood in Russia. If you look at the actual history of our homeland, it's hard to overlook a pattern that is unpleasant for the average citizen. Major geopolitical defeats were sometimes more useful than brilliant victories. Every military defeat, every shameful peace, did not destroy the Rus or Russia, but rather strengthened it, and, in the future, led to an expansion of its borders and the consolidation of its position. Probably the most terrible defeat, in fact a crushing and enslavement, was the Mongol invasion, which resulted in a 300-year yoke. One might think it couldn't get any worse. Complete loss of sovereignty, national humiliation, submissive tribute payments from generation to generation. But why was a subjugated people, under these conditions, under the boot of the conquerors, suddenly able to throw off the yoke? How could national strength grow under conditions of total control and deprivation? The yoke was slavery, but it was precisely during and under the conditions of this slavery that the Rus became so strong that they were able to throw off the yoke. There is only one reason for this paradox. After the defeat, the entire system of economy, politics, and administration changed radically. The boyars and the numerous princes lost their former power and the ability to rob the common people endlessly and with impunity. The people were better off. Every military defeat, every shameful peace in Russia gave birth to reforms, cutting the elites down to size, and more freedom for the people. And every time, this led to the same result. The shattered country began to rapidly gain strength. How to turn a current defeat into a victory tomorrow is best demonstrated by the Crimean War and the Treaty of Paris, which cost Russia its Black Sea Fleet. The elites are always closer to the throne than the common people. Therefore, for the leadership of a state, it is not so easy to make a decision that breaks the vicious cycle even before the defeat. But as Kutuzov said, with the loss of Moscow, Russia is not yet lost, and every military defeat secured new victories for us through reform. So, in one of the highest circulation newspapers in Russia, it was already argued that defeats in wars would be good for Russia because they create space for important reforms that only make Russia stronger. Is that a text you write when you're on the path to victory? What is that, if not defeatism and the careful preparation of the country for a defeat? But Putin will also know what the mill blogger is officially reporting at the front. And on days like these, the following words come to mind. The only thing Russia does not forgive its czars for is lost wars. To avoid this defeat, Russia will very likely mobilize again after its parliamentary elections in September. Without a technological breakthrough, even more Russian soldiers will be Putin's way of trying to turn the war in his favor, and it will cost many more Russians their lives. It is unlikely that this will be successful. At least, the Russian mill blogger Fighter Bomber says, let's assume that 5 million citizens are mobilized. Of course, mostly by force, through border closures, measures similar to those of the Central Commission for Mobilization, and so on. And is there even a 1% chance that in a year we won't have 500 more square kilometers of land, but 5 million fewer citizens? Nevertheless, the war is not yet decided. The Ukrainian commander-in-chief Syrskyi says this himself. At the same time, you must not underestimate the enemy. It's still a long way to a turning point in the war. The aggressor has not given up its plans to fully occupy the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, is striving to expand its offensive in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, and aims to create and enlarge a buffer zone in the northern regions of Ukraine. The intensity of missile and drone attacks, the use of guided bombs, and the number of crimes against the civilian population are increasing. The Austrian analyst Franz Stefan Gaudy said a little over a month ago in the Financial Times that the coming months of fighting would show whether Kiev's strategy had proven successful. Currently, he adds, Ukraine has the qualitative upper hand in drone warfare, but Russia retains quantitative advantages on all fronts. He also warns that if Russia effectively adapts to Ukraine's recent advances in medium-range attacks and drone warfare more broadly, the situation at the front could look different by summer. Currently, Ukrainian soldiers at the front report to the Financial Times that morale is higher than it has been in a year. Despite all cautious restraint, it is remarkable that after almost 4 years, Ukraine is able to improve its situation so dramatically that it is worth discussing whether it is currently winning the war. Ukraine is now in its best strategic position since the Russians left the right bank of the Dnipro. If you enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment if you have something to add, and if you're new here, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss future videos. Thanks for your attention and see you soon. Thanks also to the supporters on Patreon as well as here on YouTube. Special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Mahamuri and to the lieutenants Robert Veal, Immelkoff, Floya Capri, Bertainment, Lickchatter, NTX, Malermeister Nagel, Markus F., Alex Rosenthal, Matt Best, Mutter 1000 Janis G. Cunningham, Oistris, Finn, 55 Flecktan, Jans vom Eck, Uwe Dufresne, Nickname Tutubib, Carsten Schulz, Tequila 42. Thank you very much. Without you, this wouldn't be possible.